Hey, welcome to On the Clock, a collaboration between the Pack-A-Day Podcast and the Draft Fellows. I'm Andrew Mertig. That's Kyle Fellows. Together, we are the Draft Fellows, and over the next few months, we'll be taking this. We'll be doing a series that covers picks 1 through 32, each team's biggest need, and who they should be considering at that pick. You can check out the video of all 32 episodes on the Draft Fellows channel on YouTube. You can check out the audio version of the Pack-A-Day. Make sure you're checking out the rest of our channel as we talk about roster building, the NFL draft, and some really interesting topics. As we get closer to the end of April, Kyle, we're on to pick 12.
We are on to pick 12, man. This is an exciting series to go through these picks. I feel like we learn a lot as we do it. And Dallas is one of those teams that could go in about a billion different directions logically, and then they could do some weird things too. And I feel like Dallas is one of those teams that keeps us on our toes. We never know what they're going to do. They do have a lot of needs. They could go running back. They could add a weapon at wide receiver. They could talk about the edge rusher position. Like the Cowboys almost seemingly intentionally chose to not address the running back room in any significant way last year. Rico Dowdle did his best, but he's Rico Dowdle, right? And now he's an unrestricted free agent. So Dallas has to do something, right? Like they have to have bodies at least. So that's going to be something they address at some point. At wide receiver, CeeDee Lamb is obviously the number one option there, and that's a good thing to have worked out. But the rest of the room there is kind of unclear, right? Like Brandon Cooks might not be back. Jalen Tolbert probably isn't a dynamic number two. Jake Ferguson is entering his last year of his deal if you want to consider the tight end position. So weapons in general are a need for the Cowboys. And then at offensive line, Zach Martin really threw a wrench in things when he had announced that he's done, right? Like he's retiring after an incredible career there with the Cowboys. So Dallas is definitely going to need to address the guard position somehow. And then I mentioned pass rusher earlier. We know Micah Parsons is here. It sounds like they're trying to get a deal done, keep him there, keep him a Cowboy. And they're probably looking to get a little bit more out of Marshawn Nealon in year two, who they took last year out of Western Michigan. But Chauncey Golston played 700 snaps for this Cowboys team in 2024, and he's a free agent. So suddenly somebody's going to have to take some snaps there at edge rusher outside of Micah Parsons. And so that's obviously a need that they could look to address there at edge rusher as well.
Yeah, in full transparency, we're recording this before the tampering period. So the Cowboys may have addressed wide receiver and they may have gotten the deal done with Micah Parsons, but that doesn't change their needs at all.
Correct.
Even
Yeah.
if they get a veteran wide receiver, they still need to look to inject that room with some youth. So taking a look at pick 12 is a really interesting point in the draft. I think the Cowboys might be aggressive this year and try to strike a move up for one of the edge rushers to pair with Micah Parsons, as you mentioned. But they also have an aging, expensive roster with a decent amount of holes to fill. So I think a move down is also realistic. It's an interesting talent cliff based on the expectations of the players we expect to be here. I think we kind of talked about like there's the top four and what we perceive that to be. Then there's maybe 3 or 4 players that we still kind of think like top 10-ish quality.
Yeah.
Then there's a big stretch of players that are all kind of lumped together, and the Cowboys are on the early end of this. And so, would they have a trade partner if they want to move down? I don't know that teams are going to be real aggressive trying to get from the 20s into the mid-teens, because you're kind of better off just staying where you are and getting what you want. So as far as specific players, I mean, they're probably going to have their pick of running backs. They might even have their pick of wide receivers. So could Ashton Genty be appealing? Would they consider like a Tetairoa McMillan, Matthew Golden, or whatever wide receiver you happen to think is the best one in this class? There's likely to be several edge players to consider. So you could talk about Shamar Stewart of Texas A&M if he is, if he falls a little bit. Michael Williams from Georgia, Nick Scorton also from Texas A&M, James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee. Maybe that's a little early for him, but like plenty of interior offensive line players available as well. So lots of players that fit in with that sort of bulk of needs that you talked about. But now we're going to talk about what we think they are going to do.
All right. So there are some seriously talented edge rushers that I think the Dallas will think long and hard about taking here at 12. After the combine, Shamar Stewart, like you said, like 12 may not be possible for him. He may be pushing his way up the board too far, but I think that he's certainly in play if he were to be here. I am actually really tempted to take someone like Tyler Booker here, the offensive guard, who could come in and just be a road grader for this offense. They could also go with the more athletic Armand Membu, who again is another player who's ascending. But I did tease it. I'm going to go Shamar Stewart. I just think the value here is too good to pass up if he happened to be on the board. With the short term and the long term questions at pass rusher for Dallas, I think he would be a great fit there. The Cowboys get a player in who can pair with Micah Parsons, assuming they're able to keep him there in the building with a new deal. And then obviously you've got a group of Shamar Stewart, Parsons, and Marshawn Nealand. And I think you feel pretty good about that group going forward.
Yeah, Stewart would be such a force opposite of Micah Parson. And really, like, even sliding inside in certain situations,
Yeah.
we know that the Cowboys have been really, really successful with Odigizua. And he may or may not be back, but I think Stewart is going to give you a lot of juice rushing from the inside or off the edge. But with Brian Schottenheimer taking over, I'm going to go with an interior offensive lineman. Stephen Jones remembers the Cowboys investing in Travis Frederick in the first round and Zach Martin in the first round, and the success that brought the Cowboys. And I'm starting to think that Will Campbell from LSU might slide a bit because of some length concerns. I think that would be a perfect fit. I don't have to list a specific player here. I can make up my own rules, Kyle. But I think interior offensive line makes the most sense from a value and a team need. I think Will Campbell would be the ideal fit here.
Yeah, I like Will Campbell a lot, and I know that Booker is Tyler Booker that I mentioned is another player who is ascending draft boards. Didn't test as well as people may have hoped that he would at the combine, but it seems like this is a player that coaches want to get in their building. They believe in him as a leader and a worker, and so I think that he'll be a player that maybe goes a little bit higher than even his athletic testing has maybe put on paper for people. But wanted to mention really quickly that Osa Adigizua actually agreed to a contract extension with the Cowboys about an hour before we recorded this podcast. So that information is out. They will have Osa back with the Cowboys in the formula for 2025. So breaking news to us on this podcast.
It's really, really old news to the listeners.
Yeah, old news to you, but new news to us. But yeah, it'll be really fascinating to see what direction the Cowboys look to go as they look to be competitive, but also build for their future. Lots of ways they could handle this draft. So thanks for joining us on this episode of On the Clock with Pack-A-Day Podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe to the show and stick with us as we preview all 32 teams in this series leading up to the 2025 NFL Draft. From the draft room to the gridiron, the Draft Fellas have got you covered. Until next time, stay tuned and stay in the game.